In this video, we will show you how to replace your front lower ball joint on this Honda Accord. This is part of your front steering and suspension located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheels are off the ground. Remove all 4 of your 19mm lug nuts, the hubcap, and the wheel. Let's get the wheel off of here. Now with that out of the way, we have a clear view of our 36mm axle nut. Go ahead and remove the axle nut. Use a hammer and punch to break the axle free from the wheel bearing assembly located behind it. Moving along, we're going to push back our caliper piston. That goes inside this area here. You can use a small prying device, come inside the slot of the caliper, gently pry up against the brake rotor behind there, and as you start pulling it away, it's going to start pushing in that piston. Now that we have the caliper piston pushed back, let's have a look at the flex hose. You'll find that it has a mounting bracket, and that's held in place with 2 10mm headed bolts. Remove the pair. Let's get these out of here. Now we can make our way to our 2 caliper bracket mounting bolts. These are 17mm on these. A quick inspection and we'll start it back in just a couple threads. Get this one out of here. Now we can take hold of the caliper, carefully remove it from the rotor. The next thing that you need to do is have a quick look at your braking material. You have your inner brake pad and your outer brake pad. If it looks like it's worn, it's a good time to go ahead and replace your front brakes. This one looks fine. We'll make sure we hang it aside so it's putting no pressure on our flex hose. Move along to disconnecting your outer tie rod end from the steering knuckle. We'll remove the cotter pin and the 17mm nut. After it's removed, go ahead and start it back on there a couple threads. We'll use a hammer, give this a couple loving bonks to break it free. A quick inspection of that tie rod end to make sure it's not damaged in any way. We'll set that aside for now. Continuing on, let's make our way to the lower ball joint here. Once again, we have a locking cotter pin. We'll just take that out of place and recycle it properly. Use a 17mm to remove the nut, a quick inspection, and start it back on just a couple threads. Now the next thing we need to do is apply upward pressure on the suspension. We want to be careful not to cause any damage to the rotor or the backing plate. We'll be applying pressure directly along the hub surface here. While having pressure on there, we'll continue on with a hammer and tap on the lower control arm, causing vibration to break this free. Remove your support from the area. Now it's time to separate the upper ball joint. You know what to do. Remove the locking cotter pin. We'll use a 17mm to remove the nut, start it back on just a couple threads, and then tap on this area, causing vibration to break this free. Take hold of your upper control arm and pull it down. If you have a hard time pulling this down, you could use a pry bar and use some leverage. Make your way to that lower ball joint mounting nut now. We'll just go ahead and remove that. Now we can lift up on the knuckle and pull it out and away, being extremely careful for the axle. Now on the bench, we can start pressing the ball joint out. The lower ball joint will press out from the bottom up towards the top. We're looking along the top because I need to show you this. If you were to look at the top of the ball joint, you're going to find that it's circular. If you were to use a ball joint cup, the circular cup is going to cover part of the ball joint, so you need to make sure you have a specialty cup. I went ahead and cut an adapter that will fit in this area. I have this area that will protrude out further, which will come down along this outer portion. And then as far as the inboard portion closest to the bearing, you can tell it's hollowed out. Put that right on there. It's essential to make sure that you do have an area inside of the adapter that makes it so the ball joint can make its way up inside. With that said, we'll continue on with the rest of our adapters here. We'll have one up along the top, essentially just something flat to press up against. As for the bottom area here, this is where the driver of the ball joint press will be pressing against. If you were to press directly up against the stud of the ball joint, typically it's just going to destroy the ball joint and push out the stud, and then you're going to have to continue on. You could also use an impact socket or an adapter if you have something like that. Slide it right over the top there and drive up against that. We'll have it set up just like this, and now we can continue on. Let's get this on here. Try to get everything aligned as straight as possible, of course. Just have to loosen it up, make our adjustments as necessary. At this point, we'll start driving the ball joint up inside this area. You're going to see it start pushing from down along the bottom up and through the knuckle. Now we can pause with that ball joint press because we can't get it to go out any further, and we'll have this in a vise, continue on with a hammer, give it a couple loving bonks. There it is, friend. The next thing you need to do is clean up the mounting surface on the knuckle where your brand new ball joint will go. We'll use some fine sandpaper, give it a light scuffing, and a quick inspection. Not only do you need to clean inside the port, but you also need to make your way along the outside here. The base of the ball joint will be pressing down in there. Go ahead and scrape it out. If you need to, you can use a flat blade screwdriver. I like to put a tiny bit of penetrant on this area. And now we can install our brand new lower ball joint. When you install this, you want to make sure you have it in the proper orientation, so if this was in the vehicle, it will be facing down. Slide this right into position. Now while we press this in, we need to make sure that we do not press in the center of the ball joint cap. That can cause damage. You only want to press along this outer portion. We'll find an adapter that fits just over that. Perfect. We have our adapter for the top. We know that's going to work. Put that right into the ball joint press. Now as for the bottom, we want to make sure that we have a cup that fits over the ball joint, but it also has a flat surface along the bottom for the ball joint press driver to rest against. We'll get everything aligned as close as possible here and drive it in. Just confirm we're properly aligned. This is not a race. We do not want to cause any damage to the ball joint. Double check all the way around. All right, let's start applying pressure. You're going to see this start driving into the steering knuckle. We want to make sure that the base is bottomed out against the steering knuckle. Once you feel as though you have it pressed all the way in, use a hammer and tap on this area. We want to cause vibration. That'll help it shift into place just in case it's off kilter a little bit. remove your ball joint press and adapters. We'll just give this a quick inspection. Now, if you were to look down along the bottom area here, along the bottom of the steering knuckle, you're going to find that you have a small groove on the ball joint itself. In your ball joint kit, you'll find that it came with a brand new snap ring. You want to make sure you have snap ring pliers. We'll go ahead and squeeze on that, which will separate this. Slide it over the boot of the ball joint, being extremely careful not to cause any damage. We'll bring that all the way down into the groove. The next thing you need to do is double check to make sure it's completely seated. I can see along this area right here, I'm not seated inside the groove. That can potentially be dangerous. Just feel all the way around this to confirm. Perfect. Let's get this over to the vehicle. At the vehicle, before we install the steering knuckle, let's clean and inspect the axle shaft splines. You can use a wire brush for this. Double check to make sure nothing's rotted or damaged in any way. This looks good. We'll continue on with some copper anti-seize along the splined area only. Spread that around with a gloved finger. Now we can install our steering knuckle. When we put this in place, let's slide the axle through the bearing and continue with that lower ball joint through the lower control arm. We'll get the upper ball joint in place. Once again, if you have a hard time pulling down on the control arm, use a small prying device. Snug it up, torque it to 32 foot-pounds. Now that this is torqued, the next thing that you need to do is pay attention to the slots on the mounting nut in comparison to the hole on the stud itself for the ball joint. If it's not properly aligned to be able to put in a cotter pin, continue tightening the nut until the very next slot is. It looks as though ours is properly aligned, so I'll continue on with my cotter pin. Slide it right on through there and pin it over. Make our way down to the lower ball joint, same process, start it on, snug it up, torque it to 32 foot-pounds as well. Once again, we're paying attention to the slot on the nut in comparison to the hole in the stud. Get our cotter pin here. Now we can get the caliper back in place. Start in both of your mounting bolts. We'll be using some blue thread locker. Once you have them started in, snug them up and torque them to 80 foot-pounds. Let's make our way to the flex hose mounting bracket. We want to make sure that we install both of those 10mm headed mounting bolts. Snug them up. Install your outer tie rod and stud into the steering knuckle. We'll get that in place. Start on the mounting nut, bottom it out, torque that to 33 foot-pounds. Once you have it torqued, you want to make sure that you have it properly aligned so you can put in your locking cotter pin. This one looks like it has to be adjusted, so we'll continue tightening. Now we can slide our cotter pin through there. Make sure we pin it over. Now it's time to install our axle nut. When you're doing this, you never want to use an impact gun. You do not want to cause any damage to your wheel bearing. You can snug it up with your hand or by ratchet. We'll get this closer down to the ground, and then we can torque it to manufacturer's specifications. Now with this closer to the ground, we can torque it. What you may find when you go to torque this is going to want to spin on you. If that's the case, you can either have a second person inside of the vehicle holding the brake pedal firmly, or you can use a pry bar diagonally down across this area, down towards the ground. We'll torque this to 180 foot-pounds. Once you have that torqued, the next thing that you need to do is lock it in. If you were to look at the end of the axle shaft, you can see that it has a small notched out area. We'll use a hammer and punch and drive the nut into that area, locking it in so there's no way this can loosen up on us while we're driving down the road. Let's give the area one last quick inspection to make sure everything's torqued as necessary and we can reinstall the wheel with the hubcap. When installing your hubcap, you want to look for the valve stem port. Align it with your valve stem. With that aligned, all the lug stud holes should align as well, and we'll continue on with the lug nuts. Start them on, bottom them out. We'll get the wheel safely back on the ground, and we can torque each of these to 80 foot-pounds. With the wheel back on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friend, we've got our vehicle back together. At this point, you want to go ahead and take it for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.